Before you even set foot on Plymouth soil, imagine a world where rivers double as open-air toilets and your morning coffee is a cup of lukewarm pond scum. Punishments for jaywalking don't exist because you can't even walk without frostbite turning your toes into tiny ice sculptures. Plagues lurk in every handshake, and your hearty breakfast could be lichen that wouldn't pass a toddler's taste test. Before you get settled in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content I share here. Ready or not, we're about to crawl into the frosty, faith-fueled trenches of the Mayflower settlers, where seasickness is a daily ritual and survival feels like a cosmic prank. Strap in for an immersive dive that'll make your memory foam mattress look like a 5-star spa. You awaken in a shoebox-sized berth below deck, the cramped ceiling brushing your forehead like a mocking finger. The hull groans with every wave, sounding less like a proud vessel and more like a dying whale gasping its last breath. Your prized chamber pot, a ceramic tragedy, reeks of yesterday's seasickness and yesterday before's regrets. Moist straw clings to your knees, as damp and unwelcome as the soggy cereal you'd kill for right now. Deckhands grunt and guffaw as they heave your meager belongings overboard your socks, your only Bible, and the restful posture you once knew. Each splash of your possessions against the Atlantic feels like your dignity slipping into the abyss. Your knees protest like a bag of marbles whenever you try to stand on these slick planks under gale-force winds. You clutch the mast for dear life, wishing you had booked a memory foam mattress instead of signing up for this floating torture chamber. A rat the size of a hamlet scuttles across your bunk, reminding you that actual varmints now outrank you in ship hierarchy. You steel yourself for another bout of projectile vomiting, fantasizing about artisanal avocado toast that only existed in another timeline. The rancid tang of sweat and salt water swims in your mouth like a toxic aquarium. You've already lost count of how many times you've clutched the rail in blind panic, praying for solid ground or at least an iPhone to call for help. By the time you stagger off the plank onto Plymouth's muddy shore, frostbite nips at your toes like tiny, angry squirrels. The hearty stew waiting for you is glorified lichen boiled in rainwater. Congratulations, you're eating nature's bus fare. Your spoon scrapes the bottom of the cauldron with a hollow clang that echoes through your empty belly. Each mouthful tastes like a soggy moss ball that spent the night hanging out with a rotting log. Sermon bells ring at dawn, shattering any hope of sleep or personal space. You yank on damp breeches that smell like they've been pressed against a wet dog and a campfire. Shuffling to the chapel tent feels like navigating a frozen obstacle course of complaints and frozen knuckles. Inside, your preacher drones on, quoting psalms like a broken record stuck on existential despair. Your numb fingers fumble for the pew, which is less bench and more wooden plank from the depths of hell. You try to focus on spiritual salvation, but mostly plot your revenge on whoever invented communal worship in sub-zero temperatures. Nearby, a fellow pilgrim attempts to suppress a sneeze, but instead erupts like a malfunctioning teapot. The collective sniffles and coughs create a symphony of human misery worthy of its own soundtrack. Just when you think it can't get worse, a flock of seagulls swoops in for a surprise scavenger hunt at your feet. Their screeches pierce the air like a YouTube notification gone rogue. You contemplate whether sacrificing your soggy coat might distract them long enough for you to escape. But you're wearing it, so you're stuck in bird territory, where every gust of wind could turn into a mid-air pooping party. At midday, you're back at the cauldron, this time with a bucket of brackish water for cleaning, and you wonder if your ancestors would rather swim in sewage. Your teeth chatter partly from the cold and partly from the realization that cold coffee sounds like a heavenly remedy right now. Minutes stretch into hours as you gnaw on a rock-hard biscuit that likely predates Shakespeare. Each bite feels like chewing on a medieval garden tool, and you briefly daydream of a Starbucks drive-through. Meanwhile, lice stage, a hostile takeover of your scalp, turning your hair into a flea-infested amusement park. You scratch until your knuckles bleed, yet the little jerks hold on to their ticket for dear life. Rats keep popping up beneath floorboards, eyeballing your biscuit like it's the last Twinkie on earth. You might actually fight a rodent for pastry rights if given half a chance. When night finally falls, the temperature plunges further, and your blanket weighs more than a small cow drowning in sog. You huddle under it like a guilt-ridden burrito, praying for a miraclier, at least a down comforter. The deck above you creaks ominously, as if the ship itself is laughing at your misfortune. In the darkness, you wonder if your ancestors had to conduct a census of frostbite victims just to pass the time. Yet somehow, you're still alive, which technically makes you a Thanksgiving miracle in training. But hey, at least you dodged scurvy long enough to earn your own personalized plaque on the Pilgrim Council of Survivors. You stumble out of your cavernous sleeping hole into the bracing chill of dawn, your breath freezing mid-exhale into a tiny cloud of despair. Your first chore is to fetch water from an icy spring 6 muddy yards from camp, and you cringe at each step as your wooden shoes squelch through sludge. The bucket you carry leaks at the bottom, turning your precious cargo into an overpriced drizzle. A cloud of midges swarms around your face, tickling your nostrils like unwelcome prima donnas. You try to shield yourself with a tattered kerchief that smells like 3-day-old goat cheese. As you dip the bucket, your hand brushes an oily sheen on the water's surface you've just discovered planktonous funeral swim parties. After returning with half a pail's worth, you hand it off to another pilgrim whose smug nod suggests he's already mastered this torture. Next, you're assigned the firewood detail, splitting damp logs that scream under your axe with every chop. The wood is so wet that sparks refuse to ignite, and you end up inhaling the smoke like it's Frigo lung seasoning. The pile of kindling grows slower than your will to live, so you start stabbing rotten chunks just to feel productive. Meanwhile, across the clearing, someone's pet chicken has escaped and is pecking at your half-frozen toes, evidently mistaking them for a slightly overripe yam. You shriek, hop around like a startled frog, and risk dropping half the firewood you just felled. With the fire grudgingly sputtering, you're sent to clean the communal latrine pit. The wooden shack reeks so badly that your eyeballs water more than a soap opera villain. Maggots perform synchronized swimming in the excrement river at your feet, and you swear you can hear them giggling. A lone fly buzzes your ear, delivering an unwelcome motivational speech to take a dip. You smear mud on your fingers to avoid direct contact, which only seems to satisfy the larvae's lustful cravings. After scraping the slush into a bloody barrel, you step out to find frozen turds glued to your boots like unwanted holiday ornaments. You strategy. Fling them into the bushes and pray they vanish into some alternate gross dimension. By midday, your stomach grumbles at the memory of breakfast 2 moldy biscuits and a cup of horse broth. You fantasize about a grilled cheese that you've never had but assume must exist somewhere beyond the horizon. Hunger pangs bounce in your gut like marbles in a tin can, reminding you that scurvy is a slow-moving riot in your gums. A fellow pilgrim offers you half of his stale dry biscuit, which you accept with the enthusiasm of someone discovering gold. You nibble at it like a starving chipmunk until a rat the size of a small dog bursts from the straw, claiming your crumbs as its birthright. You and the rat share a standoff that ends when it charges at you, prompting a frantic sprint that nearly topples the entire biscuit brigade. Then you head to the cattle field to assist in milking a cow that probably regrets its life choices. It kicks you in the shin and splatters sour milk all over your pants-parting gift of dairy hell. The milk curdles in microscopic seconds, forming cottage cheese flakes in places you didn't know cheese could land. You wipe the goo off with your sleeve, which you later toss once you realize it's now considered biohazardous waste. Back at camp, your clothes have frozen solid in the noonday breeze, and trying to walk feels like navigating a lumberjack cosplay competition. Your hands ache so badly you contemplate chewing them like spare ribs just to test their flavor. To top it off, a frostbitten finger falls numb, forcing you to calculate whether it's more painful to seek help or to pretend everything's fine. As twilight approaches, you're tasked with hanging the laundry from which only the socks miraculously survive the descent into the mud puddle. You watch them tumble end over end before vanishing beneath a sludge wave, and you exhale the single tear left in your tear duct. Exhausted, you trudge back to your berth, hoping the rats will at least wait until you fall asleep to start their nightly rave. Instead, they're already there, brawling in the darkness like tiny, rodent UFC fighters. You slide into your bedroll with the grace of a deboned chicken, only to discover that your blanket has become a nest for lice, hatching a conference of microscopic vampires. You sigh, clutching your empty stomach, and whisper to the universe, "Is this what Thanksgiving promises?" Because at this point, any festival that celebrates famine sounds like a cosmic punchline. But hey, you can at least brag about your survival skills at cocktail parties if anyone still wants to invite you after you describe this ordeal. You blink against the pale light filtering through the tent's tattered canvas, realizing your eyes have dried into sandpaper overnight. You haul yourself upright on limbs that feel like broken oars, each creak protesting louder than a church bell. Outside, the camp is a swirl of frost-dusted coats and muttered curses better left unspoken. Your first job of the day is to repair the leaky roof of the communal mess tent, which looks more like a soggy clamshell than a dinner hall. Armed with a handful of rotted wood scraps and rusted nails, you stand on a wobbly ladder that threatens to collapse under your weight. A gust slams you backward, sending a cloud of dust into your face that chokes you until you taste the ghost of every pilgrim who died of dysentery. You batten down the weak flaps with so many nails that you wonder if you're building a coffin instead of patching a roof. Next, you trudge to the field to haul in a rope of half-frozen fish hauled by fishermen who treat you like a glorified seafood concierge. Each cod is so oily that your hands slide off like a greased pig, and you juggle them until one lands headfirst in a puddle of slime. You can practically feel its shame as you rescue it by the tail, dripping filth across your boots. Back at the butchering post, you're handed a cleaver dull enough to shame a butter knife. You hack at the fish until it resembles abstract art, splattering guts that attract flies like a black hole of decay. The buzzing orchestra is so relentless, you suspect they're in cahoots with the maggots in the latrine. You shove the mess aside and attempt to gut out the innards, only to realize the entrails smell like someone aged cheese in a wet sock. You yelp and leap away, nearly taking out the makeshift fence with you. After disposing of the offal in a hole hastily dug by your own trembling hand, you pause to catch your breath. The air is so toxic with fish vapors that you feel like a beached whale fated to starve from nothing but rancid steak. Your next task is sowing winter barley, which involves bending over in conditions that would freeze a lesser spine solid. Soil clings to your fingertips like greedy toddlers, and you flinch every time a shard of frozen earth pricks your palm. Hours pass as you seed row after row in a back-breaking rhythm that rivals medieval torture. At midday, you're summoned to the blacksmith's forge to grind down a bent horseshoe that was apparently kicked by Satan himself. The bellows roar so hot that you imagine your eyeballs might bubble if they weren't already frozen solid. You grasp the glowing metal with tongs that sear your gloves down to charred husks. Every time you hammer, sparks fly like miniature supernovas, and you wonder if you'll accidentally signal the Spanish Armada. With your muscles screaming in unison, you finish the shoe, jam it on the stallion's hoof, and pray it doesn't buck you into eternity. Next, it's time to check the corn stores, which are locked away in a wooden chest that resembles a dungeon tomb. You pry it open, expecting nothing but nourishment, and instead find wax moths living their best life among the kernels. The tiny insects swarm over your hand in protest when you pluck out a handful of maggot-infested corn. You toss it over your shoulder like toxic confetti, vowing to reinvent colonial nutrition someday. Then you trudge to harvest a handful of wild herbs that might cure scurvy, though nobody's sure if they actually work. The green leaves taste like chewing on old parchment laced with pine resin. You swallow anyway, hoping for a miracle, and then sneeze so violently you nearly dislocate your jaw. Your throat burns like you tried to sunbathe your esophagus. At dusk, the communal fire is lit, and you're handed a bowl of watery porridge that glows in the fading light. You stir in a pinch of dried fish flakes, hoping for flavor, only to wonder why you ever thought fish and oats were compatible. Each spoonful slides down your throat like wet cardboard, and you contemplate fasting just to feel something different. Your fellow pilgrims gather around the meager feast, their faces lit by the flickering flames and the horror of their own dinner plates. A visiting trader offers a handful of dried fruit for a bag of barley, and you consider selling your own shoelaces for a taste of modern sugar. Finally, you trudge back to your berth under a sky so clear the stars look like mocking spectators. Your bedroll is colder than a tax auditor's heart, and you slide inside like a reluctant sleeper in a coffin. Your last thought before sleep takes you is that if this is purification, you'll stick to sinning. You curl into the scratchy blanket and pray for a dream where you're lying on an actual mattress. Somewhere in the darkness, a rat cheers in your honor an enemy turned reluctant roommate. You exhale a sigh that fogs the cold air, already bracing for tomorrow's rerun of misery. But hey, at least you can tell your grandkids you invented roughing it. You wake to the crack of dawn with a throbbing headache that feels like a carriage wheel rolling across your skull. The first order of business is fetching salt from the shoreline, which involves rubbing your palms raw against jagged rocks. When you kneel to scoop salt crystals, frosty sea foam splashes your face and tastes like stale tears. A gust of wind hurls a cloud of grit into your eyes, turning your vision into a sandy kaleidoscope. You squint and wipe your eyelids with the back of your hand, only to discover a colony of lice hitchhiking there. After gathering a meager handful of salt, you trudge back toward camp, feeling like a camel in a blizzard. Next, you're handed a tuft of goose feathers and instructed to stuff your pillows with them. As you pluck each quill, you inhale a puff of dusty down that descends on your lungs like tiny snow bunnies. Your ears fill with a relentless scratching as the feathers provoke allergies that your modern antihistamine self would never forgive. You sneeze so violently that you nearly decapitate your makeshift pillow with a flying quill. With your masterpiece complete, you flop onto the straw mat and wonder why anyone ever invented memory foam. Of course, your luxury pillow collapses under the weight of your head like a waterlogged sponge. That's when you realize you'd trade your dignity for a Tempur-Pedic guarantee. Before you can curse your luck, you're summoned to the garden to weed the hardy spinach that tastes like chewing on iron filings. The soil there is caked with snail trails that glitter in the sun like a fever dream. Every weed you yank out spawns 3 more in its place, mocking you with botanical multiplication skills worthy of a wizard. You stab at the ground with your hoe, sending clods of earth flying onto your face and into your hair. You cough as the dust settles in your throat, giving you a DIY sandpaper exfoliation you didn't ask for. While you work, a pair of crows squawk overhead, sounding like disgruntled airline passengers. One dive bombs and steals a chunk of your bread-and artisanal loaf you'd smuggled in from the future. You chase it in circles until it perches atop a fence, cawing triumphantly as if daring you to try again. Defeated, you pocket your honorary crust and decide to ration it like liquid gold. Then the quartermaster orders you to repair a split wagon wheel, using only a wooden wedge and your cold fingers. You lay on your back beneath the wagon, peering into a mess of spokes that resemble a medieval torture device. Sweat beads on your brow even in the frigid air as you attempt to fit the wedge between warped timber. With a mighty thud, the wheel snaps back into place, catapulting you onto your backside in a surprise rodeo. The laughter of onlookers rings in your ears as you scramble to your feet, your pride scattered like marbles. After nursing a bruised ego, you join the soup preparation detail at the communal kitchen fire. A bored cook ladles a murky broth into your tin bowl, garnishing it with a single, suspicious-looking turnip. You raise the spoon to your lips hesitantly, bracing for the chemical onslaught of overboiled vegetables. The first taste hits your tongue like an industrial solvent, and you sputter it back into the bowl. The cook glares and demands you eat before the crows pick your eyeballs clean. Resigned, you gulp it down and brood over the thought that at least modern ramen has flavor packets. Midway through the slop, a squeaking sound alerts you to a mouse siphoning the broth from the rim of your bowl. You shoo it away, only to discover claw marks on the handle that look eerily like a hangry customer's autograph. With the bowl finally empty, you dunk it in icy water that causes it to crack like brittle ceramic. You toss the ruin into a pile of broken cookware, worthy of a landfill art exhibit. By afternoon, frostbite has redecorated your toes into tiny statues that you suspect would fetch a pretty penny in an art gallery. Your boots are stiff with frozen muck, making every step feel like a performance in a slapstick comedy. You attempt to loosen them, only to pull out a slender icicle shaped like a toothpick. Shivering, you scramble to build a fire from scraps of driftwood that burn with more smoke than heat. Tears form in your eyes as you stare at the feeble flame, flirting with the idea of mastering modern pyrotechnics. You huddle close, imagining yourself wrapped in an electric blanket from a world beyond this frostbitten prison. As dusk settles, you crunch across the frozen ground to collect a handful of pine needles for tea. You chew on them raw when boiling water proves elusive, each bite a mouthful of pine-scented regret. But hey, at least you can tell yourself you're living the ultimate survival mode Challengino video game required. You squint at the hazy sunrise and realize that your straw-stuffed boot has transformed into a frozen sculpture overnight. You kick it off with a grunt and send up a spray of gritty hay-like shards that land in your hair and colonize like unwelcome interns. Your feet emerge pale and wrinkled, more like raisins than skin, and you debate whether to tape them back on or let them nap. A pilgrim hands you a pail of lukewarm well water that tastes like it's been filtered through last month's swamp. You attempt to swallow but end up dribbling the sludge down your chin like a toddler in a condiment crisis. An old woman shoves a crust of barley bread into your hand and tells you it's artisanally mold-cured for flavor. You take a bite and confirm that mold-cured is code for mildew-marinated misery. You swallow anyway, because starvation is the fastest route to a one-way ticket into pasture laziness. Suddenly, you're called to carry a sack of salted fish over your shoulder, the weight pulling you sideways like a drunken uncle at a wedding. Each step sends gravity into a frenzy, and you stumble through the mud praying you don't faceplant into the rotting fish. You make it to the drying rack, tie off the sack, and set it down with the care one might reserve for a ticking time bomb. Next, you march to the communal bath zone, a wooden trough filled with water as clear as pea soup. You strip down, heart pounding like a medieval techno beat, and dip a toe in to test the temperature. The water slaps your skin with the enthusiasm of a jilted lover, and you leap back like you've just been baptized in ice. But hygiene is a luxury you can't afford, so you grit your teeth and dive in like a polar bear on a caffeine buzz. The trough is home to several kinds of parasites, which greet you like old friends, pastel in jellyfish form. You flick them off your flesh with panicked pats, hoping none decide to RSVP for permanent residency. Emerging from the water, you wrap yourself in a threadbare tunic that belongs in a cursed museum exhibit. Your bones ache so badly it feels like you've been steamrolled by an angry carriage wheel. You hobble to the latrine with the urgency of someone whose bladder just found its spine. Inside the wooden coffin shack, you squat over a hole that's more like a geyser of filth. A rat darts past your leg, mistaking you for an overpriced buffet, and you shriek like a banshee on bath day. Holding your nose, you accomplish your goal and exit triumphantly, believing you've earned the right to nap. No such luck. No, it's time to gather embers from last night's fire for the morning hearth. The embers are cold, lifeless lumps until you coax a spark from a flint that feels like trying to start a relationship with broken Tinder settings. Finally, a flame flickers, and you slap on twigs until the fire roars like a dragon with digestive problems. Smoke fills your eyes, but modern sunglasses haven't been invented yet, so you just choke artistically. Triumphant, you fry yesterday's salted fish over the flames, waiting for it to crisp into something resembling edible sushi. Instead, the grease pops like miniature fireworks, sending hot droplets onto your face and making you duck like a matador in a rodent-run bullring. You seize a chunk, chew it with the fervor of someone discovering how to chew, and nod solemnly as if you've invented a new cuisine. Mid-chew, a pilgrim strolls by and warns you about scurvy, referencing citrus fruits like they're mythical unicorns. You snort and remind him that your budget doesn't cover unicorn hunts, let alone oranges. After breakfast, you're sent to scrub the common hall floor with a rag that's seen more war than your battle-hardened knees. The floorboards protest under your elbow grease, releasing decades of grime in a blackish slurry. Every scrub stroke yields a new revelation of stains, blood, beer, and something that might be a frog. Nobody's sure. You end up sliding across the floor in a frenzied waltz of filth and exhaustion. When the chore is finally done, your muscles feel like overcooked spaghetti, limp and ridiculous. You exit the hall to see the sun climbing high, signaling it's time to tackle the day's real workfield maintenance. As you approach the ploughed rows, you're handed a scythe sharp enough to shred a reputation. Swinging, it feels like slicing through nostalgia itself. Each weed removed is a reminder of how much you miss modern herbicides. By dusk, your back is a mountain range of spasms, and you envy the horizon for still standing after the day's onslaught. You trudge back to your berth, every joint chanting in unison like a tortured choir. To your dismay, a miniature army of mice has claimed your corner of the straw, their squeaks challenging your right to rest. You hurl an empty bucket at them, only to hear it land with a comedic clatter that would make a silent film comedian proud. Collapsing onto your freezing pallet, you exhale the day's last breath and whisper, "Next Thanksgiving, I'm sending a strongly worded complaint." You trudge behind Bradford through waist-high snowdrifts so deep they tug at your knees like a hangover clinging to your skull. The bitter gusts slice across your cheeks, turning each inhale into shards of glass in your lungs. Bradford's lantern sways at the front of the line, its feeble glow fighting a losing battle against the early spring dusk. Every so often the beam catches a heap of pale blankets heaped over shivering bodies half buried by fresh snowfall. You tighten your woolen cloak, already soaked through by yesterday's sleet, and slip on the uneven ground coated in slick ice. The thud of each corpse hitting the rough-hewn pine coffin echoes in the silence like a punctuation mark on the colony's misery. You wonder if these boxes are intended as graves or warning signs for wandering wolves. Bradford's hollow voice breaks the hush. "Another day, another saint taken before their time," he mutters. Grief pools in his eyes, but you can tell by the way he swallows that anger simmers beneath the sorrow. As you heft another frail settler whose arms dangle like damp rags, you nearly lose your grip to the numbing cold. Frost has bitten your fingertips down to coarse, blackened stubs that throb with each heartbeat. You force your fingers to release the body and shovel a mound of dirt that crunches with hidden pebbles. The stench of frozen earth mingles with the faint coppery scent of blood still clinging to ragged socks. You catch a flash of Bradford's face in the lantern light, pale, hawkish and unyielding. The ground seems to swallow the bodies, as if the earth itself were conspiring to erase memories of these lost souls. A stray gust scatters handfuls of snow into the open graves, burying your tracks and any hope of return. Your teeth chatter in protest, but you press on, shovelful after shovelful, as though the act itself might carve your own survival into destiny. Bradford pauses to drop his lantern, kneel by the newest grave, and trace runic letters into the solemn hillside. You squat beside him, your knees squeaking like a rusty hinge, staring at the crude headstone that reads, "Here lies Mercy Allerton, blessed be." Mercy's hands are crossed over her chest, a crooked smile etched by the cold into her violet lips. You blink and imagine your own name there, carved in the same jagged script. The wind howls, rattling the trapper's cabin in the distance, and for a moment you feel the world collapse inside your chest. Bradford stands and brushes snow from his codpiece, glancing at the next waiting shroud, as if calculating how much time he has left. You realize the work will not pause until every plague-weakened soul is laid to rest. Your boots sink into a hidden patch of ice and you slip, nearly sending your lantern skyward. The light wavers, illuminating a patch of footprints your own still fresh in the snow behind the graves. You kick yourself forward and grab the lantern before it tumbles, casting frantic shadows against a nearby oak. Butterflies of pale mist swirl from the chilled earth, ghostly dancers in this macabre ballet. Bradford nods to you, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity in this frozen hellscape. With each lowering of a shrouded body, you feel the weight of the colony's desperation growing heavier on your shoulders. Your breath puffs clouds that drift upward like mournful spirits fleeing the frozen grave. Bradford shouts out a psalm verse, voice cracking under the strain, and you half know the words but lack the strength to sing. Instead, you lift your shovel again, muscles burning as frost gnaws at your joints. Tiny icicles clinging to your eyelashes sparkle like broken promises in the lantern glow. You catch a glimpse of hundreds more bodies still waiting at the settlement's edge. A moaned groan escapes your lips as you realize you're just halfway through your task. Bradford's boots crunch beside you as he whispers, "At this rate, salvation might be as scarce as a warm hearth. You glance at him, shivering, and wonder if that salvation ever existed at all. Above you, church bells toll faintly from the settlement, their echo swallowed by raging winds. You pause in your digging to cup your hands and send a silent prayer into the night sky. The response is nothing but the wind's howlier-only choir in this desolate campground. You shovel the final handful of dirt onto Mercy's grave and feel a hollow victory settle over you. Bradford tips the lantern downward, casting your elongated shadow across the snow like the skeleton of a man. You brush the nearly frozen dirt from your palms, tasting iron and regret on your tongue. Congrats. You survived Bradford's winter of despair now. Sign up for your next shift as the colony's volunteer gravedigger. Because who needs limbs when you can have a cozy, subterranean cottage under the frost-swept hillside? You stumble into the hastily erected meeting tent, feet crunching on scattered straw and splintered wood. A single oil lamp winks overhead, its sputtering flame casting jittery shapes across bowed faces. Soot smudges line the prissy collars of council members whose expressions range from hopeful to homicidal. Bradford stands by a rough-hewn table, his fingers trembling as he unrolls a freshly penned vellum. You crane your neck to read the swirls of ink, each flourish looking like a miniature Jackson Pollock painting gone wrong. The wind rattles the tent flaps, threatening to extinguish the lamp and plunge you into pure darkness which would still be better than a fresh clause you hadn't read. Bradford dips his quill into a jar of ink that smells like wet charcoal and regrets. Your stomach lurches, half from the cold and half from uncertainty as you watch that quill hover above the parchment. He clears his throat, the sound echoing off the canvas like a church bell crack on Christmas morning, if Christmas meant frostbite. One by one, names are read aloud in shaky voices that betray the fear of writing one's own death warrant in legalese. Each signature feels like a sneeze in a crowded room, except instead of germs, it's responsibility you're spreading around. You realize that one miswritten shall could be the difference between democratic self-governance and an impromptu prison sentence. The only thing more palpable than the cold is the tension, thicker than the porridge Bradford forced you to eat for breakfast. You shift your weight and catch a whiff of damp wool mingled with the sour tang of body odor from 5 men who thought personal hygiene could wait till landfall. A sudden gust tears at the corner of the tent, and you reflexively clutch the table edge as if drowning. Bradford's lip quivers, and he mutters about divine providence, keeping his hand steady. You snort quietly, thinking more likely it's shock adrenaline, but you keep it to yourself. The quill finally touches down, and Bradford scrawls his signature in one fluid gesture before dropping the pen like a mic. A collective exhale floods the tent, sounding eerily like someone finally popping a sore throat abscess. You lean forward to inspect the text one last time, scanning for terms like mutiny or freeloader clause. Beneath the formal Latin name and date, you spot a phrase about just and equal laws, concepts as foreign to you as indoor plumbing. Behind you, someone coughs up what might be a lung lobe. You think you see sinew. Bradford passes the quill to the next passenger, whose hand shakes so violently you wonder if he's possessed by an exorcism gone awry. You imagine trading that quill for a thermos of hot cocoa, but you know you'd freeze before scraping up the coin. When the final name is inked, Bradford raises his voice to announce the compact is in effect. The word compact lands like a sledgehammer, signaling a contract that binds you tighter than a pair of damp breeches. A hush follows, broken only by distant screech of gulls and the clatter of cutlery from the cook's tent. You swallow hard, tasting the metallic tang of ink on your tongue. Someone behind you whispers, "We're adults now," as if that makes the last 2 months of seasickness vanishingly trivial. Bradford clears the table, rolling up the parchment and sealing it with hot wax that cracks like a gunshot. The wax bears an emblem of a ship, jagged as if carved by a drunk woodcutter. You note that if that emblem were a Tinder profile, it would read, "Seeking subsistence, must tolerate cramped quarters." A momentary grin crosses Bradford's face before he tucks the compact under his leather satchel. You pat your own satchel, still shockingly empty save for a crust of stale biscuit and a chunk of flint. Outside the tent, the wind whips more fiercely, as if attempting to shred the compact into confetti. Bradford shouts for volunteers to escort the document back to the makeshift council hall. You step forward, chest heaving, aware that you've volunteered to be the colony's inaugural mailman. The weight of the document bag swings at your hip, reminding you that democracy tastes like duty and carries like lead. 2 stragglers fall out of line, arguing about whether the compact prohibits impromptu lobster feasts. You suppress a laugh, imagining lobster rolls in this frozen hellscape, and decide you'd trade all your privileges for a hot-dipped sea claw. As you lead the procession, Bradford mutters about how law and order will save them from savagery, but you're too busy wondering how law and order tastes when seared to a crisp by dysentery. You glance down at the parchment bag, its wax seal cracking with each step, and think, this is what adulting looks like. Stained fingertips and existential dread. The path ahead is a ribbon of ice and hardship, lit only by that sputtering lamp and your own creeping panic. You press onward, clutching that compact like a life linear, a straitjacket, while carrying the cold realization that signing it might seal not just your fate but the entire colony's downfall. And you thought group projects in school were brutal welcome to the ultimate collaborative assignment. You trudge down to the icy shoreline alongside Bradford, boots squelching in half-frozen tidal pools. 2 battered fishing skiffs lean against a crumbling wharf like drunk vagabonds slumped on a tavern bench. The Cornish fishermen eye you both with the suspicion of wolves sizing up fresh meat. Bradford steps forward, chest puffed out as though the wind might carry his dignity back from where it slid off in January. You shuffle sideways, trying to appear indispensable rather than a desperate extra mouth to feed. An old salt grips a cod by its gills, its body dripping with brackish water that smells of salt and slow decay. The fish's eye bulges like a marble lodged in its skull, and you swear you hear it whisper, "Help me," as the tide laps against the pier. You gag at the stench. It's like someone dumped a chamber pot into a tide pool and left it to marinate. Bradford offers 2 barrels of maize meal, each so heavy they double as a medieval dumbbell. The fisherman scoffs and flicks a hand toward the rotting bundles, as if rejecting plague-ridden rags. The barrels weigh as much as a bale of lead, and you nearly trip just glancing at them. You wince as Bradford whispers, "It's cold coin round here," but the man's grin only widens. The fisherman slaps a scarred plank of driftwood for emphasis, sending a sprinkle of barnacle flakes into the air. You tighten your cloak, wishing you had an avocado toast to wash down the stench instead. Another fisherman emerges from the shack behind them, brandishing a slab of cod so stiff it could double as a doorstop. You recognize that unappetizing sheenth, kind that promises dysentery by dawn. Bradford pleads about scarcity and the need to nourish your starving flock, voice trembling with controlled panic. The fishermen laugh like gulls squabbling over a discarded chip shrill, chaotic mocking. You feel the laughter slice through your morale like a rusty blade. One fisherman stomps his boot against the wharf, sending a wave of ice-cold water spraying at your ankles. Bradford counters by volunteering the colony's spare labourers for their nets, hands raised like he's negotiating peace in a pirate council. The fisherman's eyebrow arches as if detecting madness beneath Bradford's civility. You imagine gutting 50 more cod in your lifetime each, a nail in the coffin of your sanity. The fisherman demands half a barrel of cornmeal in exchange, plus 2 crates of salted pork back in Plymouth. Bradford hesitates, weighing the cost of rotting meat versus mortal hunger. You taste vinegar on your tongue from the brine soaking into the wharf boards. They haggle over minutes and morsels, voices rising and falling like a storm-tossed sea. Bradford offers to teach them rudimentary Latin in return for a bit of fish, reasoning that education is worth its weight in cod. The men grunt disbelief, picturing a classroom held in a freezing tent under seabird bombs. You feel a pang of sympathy for Bradford. No one deserves to barter their dignity for dinner. The wind picks up, rattling the mast of a nearby ship and rattling your teeth. A seagull squawks overhead and defecates on the fisherman's celestial commentary on the negotiation. Bradford thrusts forward with one final concession, a promise of a future treaty guaranteeing fair trade. The fishermen huddle, exchanging looks sharp enough to cut rope. At last, they nod and shove a slimy cod into your waiting arms. You swipe the fish like it's forbidden treasure and clutch it to your chest. The fish's scales crackle beneath your fingers, coating them in a salt-encrusted slime. You bite a sliver to test its edibility, teeth sinking into the mealy flesh. Instant regret floods your senses as your tongue recoils from the brackish poison. Your belly roils with the conviction that tonight's supper will be a one-way ticket to the chamber pot. You stagger back toward Bradford, cod dangling like a cursed talisman. He grips your shoulder, voice low. Better than empty hands, right? You clutch your gut and murmur a hesitant, I hope so. The wind carries a distant groan from the direction of the settlement, as if the colony itself is moaning at the thought of cod stew. You practically sprint away from the wharf, lunging toward the promise of a hearth and a hot fire. Congratulations. You just paid the colony's fish tax and it tastes like medieval swamp. You join Bradford at dawn as he strolls past half-constructed lean-tos, the pale sun glinting off hammers and saws. Each clap of wood echoes through the clearing like a blacksmith forging despair. Bradford's breath billows in front of him in clouds that resemble ghostly sermons. He stops at a half-built palisade wall and points to a crooked post that leans like a drunken sentinel. Your fingers numb as ice. You grip a mallet and tap the post into place under Bradford's watchful eye. He nods and continues on, muttering about the importance of security and sovereignty. The frost-hardened ground moans under your boots, as though complaining about being wrestled into turnips. You glance back and see a few settlers half hidden behind stacked firewood, eyes gleaming at the promise of shelter. Bradford leads you past the communal cooking pit where the cook attempts to thicken last night's congealed porridge with sawdust unsuccessfully. You wrinkle your nose, tasting grit and regret on the stale air. He stops at a wheelbarrow stacked with unshaped timbers and assigns you to carry a plank twice your height. The weight nearly snaps your shoulders in two, and you wonder if this is what colonial CrossFit feels like. Bradford's journal, clutched under his arm, seems to bulge as if stuffed with the colonists' hopes and fears. You recall reading his entries by lamplight, each line a cramped testament to endurance. He flips open the journal and scans his own script, lips moving as though reciting a prayer. A gust of wind snatches the pages, but Bradford slams the book shut before it can escape. You breathe a sigh of relief. You need that book more than you need toes. Together you navigate past rows of sleeping tents, each drooping under the weight of frost. Bradford gestures toward a makeshift greenhouse of driftwood and hides, meant to germinate seeds for spring. You kneel to inspect the soil, which feels more like frozen clay than fertile earth. Bradford rubs his chin, eyes narrowed as he muses on the miracle of life emerging from death. You picture those tiny sprouts as rebellious colonists, poking defiant green fingers through death's grip. Suddenly, he beckons you forward to distribute seeds among the shallow furrows he's carved by hand. You tiptoe along the rows, scattering grain like a miser tossing coins into a fountain. Each seed drops with a dull thud that echoes in your head as future bread or certain doom. Bradford pats the earth above the seeds, murmuring a blessing that sounds suspiciously like a curse depending on harvest. You glance at your hands, smeared with mud and desperation. He peeks over his shoulder and quips, "If these sprouts survive, so might we." You smirk, thinking that odds are better for trial by bug, infested stew than for a green thumb in winter. The sky shifts color from slate gray to bruised purple as dawn cures into day. Bradford beckons you toward the council hut, its walls patched with sailcloth and hopes. Inside, a handful of leaders huddle around a rough map drawn on animal hideate's edges singed by candle flame. Bradford taps a spot labeled Spring Planting and outlines a plan that balances corn, beans and peas like a precarious diet. One colonist pipes up with concerns about potato blight, but even he looks foolish, suggesting anything edible beyond lichen. Bradford jots the suggestion in his journal and then abruptly crosses it out, mumbling something about prioritizing minimal death count. You stifle a snort at his pragmatism. It's like choosing between freezing and famine with a straight face. The meeting dissolves into heated debate about whether to trade grain for animal pelts or keep it for seed stock. Bradford stands and raises his hand, calling for order with the solemnity of a preacher at a funeral. You brace yourself as he decrees, "We plant for posterity, not for tomorrow's belly," which sounds poetic until you realize your belly is growling. He dismisses the meeting and strides outside, journal in hand, and resolve shining brighter than his lantern ever could. You shoulder another plank for the palisade, marveling that leadership here requires equal parts quill and sore back. Bradford pauses and nods at you, the flicker of admiration in his eyes warming you more than any fire. A low rumble of distant thunder, or maybe just your stomach, breaks the silence. You heft the plank and think, if Bradford can orchestrate survival with ink and wood, maybe you can survive boredom in modern Zoom meetings. You trudge out before sunrise to the colony's meager infirmary, the air crisp enough to freeze a swear word mid-sentence. Bradford stands at the threshold, his lantern slicing through the pre-dawn gloom like a surgical beam. The lean-to is stuffed to bursting with tattered blankets, ragged straw pallets, and the stench of sickness so thick you could carve it with a knife. The infected cough in the corner sounds like rocks grinding in a blender full of gravel. You grit your teeth, recalling the time you thought seasickness was the worst thing to hit this colony. Bradford wades into the bedlam, eyes narrowed and jaw set like he's facing down an army of demons. He cups the cheek of a feverish child whose skin glistens with sweat and vinegar. The child's eyes glaze over, pupils shrinking to pinpricks of panic. You stiffen, every nerve alight with dread. Breath mists swirl around broken crockery and pools of stale broth congealed on the floor. Bradford orders you to fetch water from the communal well, the same source rumored to carry a healthy helping of dysentery. You climb over a collapsed stretcher, thankful your boots at least offer some protection against the muck. Your shoelaces dangle in the mire, threatening to tangle your fate in another disaster. The water in the wooden bucket sloshes like a half-forgotten beer key for a hangover you can't remember. You pour it gently over cloth-wrapped wounds, watching the liquid seep into ragged flesh. One settler recoils, crying out as the water mingles with half-healed scars and fresh sores. You choke back an involuntary gag, reminding yourself that you volunteered for this madness. Bradford grabs a handful of dried herbs and presses them into your palm, eyes shining with grim determination. You help him sprinkle the herbs into a steaming pot of mysterious brew bubbling in the corner. A wheezing croak escapes a nearby man whose ribs protrude like broken fence posts. You realize your gloves are shredded, fingertips slick with antiseptic and regret. Bradford grabs your hand and guides it toward the bubbling cauldron. He murmurs instructions in a tone so soft it could soothe a rabid wolf. The water in the cauldron shudders as you stir, sending tendrils of steam dancing toward the low ceiling. Bradford mutters about divine mercy and heaven-sent remedies. But you suspect it's more desperation than doctrine. You glance at the floor, littered with splashes of congealed porridge and broken bits of bone. Splinters of hope seem as scarce as fresh fish in this frozen hell. Yet Bradford persists, scooping ladlefuls of the herbal mixture and carrying them to shivering patients. He motions toward broken crates marked medical supplies, and you haul them into the center of the infirmary. They're labeled with grand promises: mercy elixir, plague salve, but look more like relics of a dead man's medicine chest. Bradford tears open one crate and reveals shards of shattered glass, rusted scalpels, and a lone tin of camphor. You swallow at the sight, imagining how broken glass might serve as surgical steel in a pinch. Bradford crushes the camphor between two stones until it smells like a forest fire in your nostrils. You inhale the sharp scent and feel your head spin with relief and nausea. For a moment, the stench of disease retreats into the corner like a skittish rat. Then the wind picks up outside, rattling the infirmary's patchwork walls, as if demanding its share of suffering. The side flap snaps open, sending a gust that extinguishes several lanterns in an instant. Bradford curses and slams the flap shut, his breath steaming in the sudden darkness. You scramble to hold a lantern aloft, the flame trembling in your fist like a living thing. Its glow reveals faces lined with terror, hope, and raw hunger. Bradford plants the camphor poultice against a groaning settler's chest, sealing it with ragged strips of linen. The smell sets your nose buzzing, reminding you that survival here is equal parts remedy and recklessness. Bradford's voice breaks as he whispers a verse from his journal, voice rough like unpolished wood. You nod, offering a trembling smile that feels like a lie. Bradford scribbles the night's events into his leather-bound book by lantern light, each entry a testament carved into memory. His script dances across the page, capturing hope and horror in the same breath. You watch him finish the entry and snap the book closed, resolve hardening in his gaze like molten steel. Now, if you're still freezing with me, smash that like button and let me know you're surviving this plague-dusted adventure. You approach the soggy marsh where the Patuxet longhouse once stood, each step sinking in peat and muscling the memory of every life lost to plague. The earth gives up tangled roots and bits of charred corn husks, reminders that this land was once teeming with families not long ago. Your boots squelch as you uncover a sun-faded wampum shard, its purple and white stripes chipped but still stubbornly vibrant, like an ancient tweet begging to be retweeted. You brush away mud to reveal a broken clay cooking pot caked in centuries of grime, its jagged edges biting into your gloved fingers like a spiteful X. Each crack and glaze flare on the pot's rim whispers tales of steamy fish broths laced with roots and berries, not the lichen sludge you've become accustomed to. As you unearth a fragment of wooden post, you imagine the towering stockade that kept enemies human and microbial at bay, though neither seemed to obey the same defenses. The hammering echo of a post driver skitters across your skull when you recall how Bradford's crew laughed at local warnings of invisible plagues. Your trowel strikes something hard and metallic, perhaps a trading knife blade or a zipper from future tourist sand. You flick away the soil to find a rusted clasp, corroded beyond recognition. It's hard to tell if it belonged to the Patuxet or to some colonial souvenir hunter with sticky fingers. You lean forward, nostrils flaring as the earth exhales a sour perfume of rotted vegetation and decades of decomposed ambition. Tiny orange beetles scatter like spilled Cheetos when you pry another layer of clay, defying your gentle archaeological methods. Your forearm itches as chitin rasp your skin, and you wonder if bug spray would have been invented sooner had these corpses been better preserved. Under a thin skin of sediment, a femur fragment emerges, brittle as a smartphone screen dropped from pocket height, but clearly human. You imagine the Patuxet hunter it belonged to, poised on the hunt before the cough and fever laid them low. A fly buzzes in your ear like an obnoxious TikTok ad, and you slap at it, leaving a smear of dirt on your cheek to match the century-old silt at your feet. A second bone shards under your brush, and you collect them reverently, as if they might scold you for your colonial myopia. Every bone feels like an unanswered question. Where were the women, the children, the stoic elders? You sketch mental diagrams of the roundhouse layout, picturing smoky fires and woven mats, rather than your cold precision tools. Your analytic mind notes the stratigraphy, layer after layer of soil, ash, and human folly stacked like a morbid wedding cake. Radar scans would map the subsurface like a CT machine, but here you only have spades, patience, and a dubious sense of purpose. You unearth a small stone axe head, perfectly shaped and weighted, its handle long rotted away, just like your optimism on a Monday morning. The thought of using this axe to hew wood for a hearth makes you grateful for modern stoves and uneven Wi-Fi bars. A cluster of tiny holes in the soil catches your eye, ancient nail placements where reed walls once met wooden frames, holding back cold drafts and curious raccoons. Your fingers tremble as you expose a faint charcoal mark, likely someone's signature in the dirt, a prehistoric graffiti reading, "I was here and I'm gone." Each discovery builds upon the last, a puzzle whose missing pieces have been chewed away by time and tragedy. You imagine the laughter, the stories, and the grief that once echoed here, long before mayhem pitched your soggy tent. Your trowel scrapes over a shiny black bead, possibly from a necklace, still glossy despite centuries of swampy immersion. Could it have been a status token or trading goods exchanged for European trinkets? You hold it up to the sky, as if challenging it to reveal its secrets, but the clouds only grumble overhead. The next scoop of soil brings up tiny fish bones, the detritus of communal feasts gone cold in history's fridge. A tiny maggot wiggles off a bone shard, the mood conductor in this archaeological opera, reminding you that life transits death daily. You shudder at the juxtaposition, delicate artistry, and the relentless munch of decay. Your notebook overflows with sketches of pattern fragments, decayed dyes, and hypothetical reconstructions, all scribbled like fever dreams. Yet for all your diagrams and postulations, the site retains an aura of tragic silence, punctuated only by your own labored breathing. Each footprint you leave risks destroying another clue, an archaeological sin that feels more violent than any colonial sword. You pause to scrub the mud off your brush, noticing how grime migrates under your nails like squatters refusing eviction. The sky darkens with incoming rainer, reminder that nature will reclaim these secrets soon enough. You consider packing up but linger, reluctant to leave the whispering earth behind. With every new find, you realize that the vanished Patuxet are still speaking through these shards, long after sermons and compacts were scrawled in ink. You carefully bag each artifact, promising to let their story breathe anew in museums instead of boggy fields. As you stand, you kick at a clay fragment that spins like a dull record, grooving with the mortar mix of past and present. The chill wind carries the faintest echo of drumbeats and chants that could be nothing more than your imagination. You shiver, partly from the cold and partly from the weight of unspoken epitaphs. Packing away your tools, you look around with fresh eyes, aware that archaeology is as much about honoring lost lives as it is about grossing out your audience. You tuck away the last pot piece and wonder if modern viewers will cringe at these relics or thank you for peeling back history's rancid layers. You kneel by a small mound of soil where dozens of broken wampum beads have clustered like a spilled M&M bag on a muddy floor. Your fingers brush against the irregular cylinders, each polished by decades of handling before the plague claimed its makers. You note their color's deep purple dye hues that rival a billionaire's velvet robe and crisp white that once gleamed brighter than your smartphone's screen. These beads were more than decoration. They were the ledger lines of a non-digital economy, each pattern whispering contracts, alliances, or heartbreak. You arranged them in tentative sequences, hoping to decipher whether this was a dowry gift or an apology note scribbled in shell. Your mind reels at the thought that these beads held more social currency than your 1,000 Instagram followers. With a delicate brush in one hand and a magnifying lens powered by nothing but sunlight, you inspect tiny scratches that might indicate the artisan's signature. You imagine the master carver perched on a riverbank, banging shell fragments with antler tools while humming a tune that civilization forgot. Each striation could be an accent mark, a primitive hashtag marking property ownership in pre-colonial media. You compare two beads that share an identical groove, suspecting they were made from the same shell and perhaps by the same hands. When you hold them side by side, the symmetry is eerie, a reminder that mass production is not a modern invention. You photograph the set, resisting the urge to add a filter that would make the purple pop even more for your audience's dopamine receptors. You sketch them in your notebook, mindful that pixel art won't capture the lustrous sheen achieved by centuries of river polish. You wonder if these beads passed between the Wampanoag and early traders as peace offerings or bribes thicker than a colonial governor's pockets. You plot a grid of bead sequences, numbers and letters scrawled like an archaeological spreadsheet ready for Excel, but doomed to remain analog. Your colleague leans over, joking that you've become a bead whisperer, but you hiss at them to respect these micro-monuments. You recall a case where similar wampum were miscategorized as garden pebbles until someone noticed they were shells, not stones. The error makes you question the reliability of historical records that mistake meaning for mundane. You place a handful of beads into a tray numbered 3.2A and label it possibly treaty tokens. Your pen barely touches the paper before your mind leaps to conspiracies. What if this treaty was secretly voided by later agreements never recorded? You tap your temple and imagine a clandestine clause buried in the grooves, invisible to anyone without your spade. Each bead feels heavier than its size when you realize it carries the weight of promises broken and honored. Your stomach flips at the irony that your work may reveal truths some parties would rather stay buried. You place the tray back in its protective box, locking it as though safeguarding nuclear codes. Outside, the wind whistles across the dig site, a sonic reminder that nature erases history as soon as you document it. You decide to test the beads with a light acidity solution, worried about damaging them but needing to identify their shell species. You mix your solution in a modern plastic cup, another anachronism that would have astonished the original bead maker. When a bubble escapes the beads, you flinch, hoping it's just air and not a sign of chemical rejection. The beads hold firm, their structural integrity defying centuries of swamp submersion. You breathe a scientific sigh of relief, mentally filing this as a win for preservation. Yet, for all these lab successes, you cannot confirm whether this was a breakup necklace or a status symbol until you compare it to museum archives. You photograph accession numbers on a glistening display case lid, planning your visit next week with the efficiency of a Black Friday shopper. You plan to slip past velvet ropes and flash tags to get a closer look at beads almost identical to these. You imagine the security guard's face when you ask if you can touch them, then chuckle at the likely absolutely not response. Back at the site, you notice fresh rain has washed away part of your bead cluster, scattering them like confetti at a morbid parade. You scramble to rescue what remains, your heart thudding like a colonist hearing rumors of a storm. You scoop them into your brush, grateful that at least a dozen survived the deluge unscathed. Each recovered bead is a micro-victory in this archaeological war against time and weather. You tally your count. 45 beads, give or take a few, each one a puzzle piece in the grand mosaic of lost Patuxet lives. As the drizzle turns to a steady downpour, you cover the trays with plastic sheeting, cursing modern garbage bags that rustle like disembodied crickets. You zip up your rain jacket and stare at the assembled beads, wondering if their story will ever be told beyond dusty ledgers and lab reports. You imagine a YouTube audience gasping at the color revelations and shuddering at your chemical dip anecdote. Despite the soggy misery, you smile at the thought that this micro-history might spark someone's macro-curiosity about indigenous resilience. You pack away your tools, beads safely boxed, ready to face the archives with dirt under your nails and wonder in your heart. You rise, resolve firm, ready to chase the next clue where undulating soil gives way to story. You trudge across the rain-lashed field where Plymouth Rock supposedly sat, your boots leaving deep, muddy footprints that no one bothered to match with the earliest surveyors' records. The locals swear the rock was down by the shoreline until someone relocated it for tourist selfies, which sounds like the world's first influencer move. Your GPS watch buzzes, mocking you with directions that lead to a cramped shrine behind velvet ropes, rather than the original boulder half submerged in salt spray. You kneel at the perimeter fence and peer through the bars, imagining pilgrims clambering up that very rock as if it were the ultimate Instagram backdrop. Urban legends claim the rock was broken by souvenir hunters armed with chisels, hammers, and unchecked entitlement. You spot a suspiciously smooth slab behind the gift shop that resembles the internet's idea of authentic colonial artifact more than actual geology. As you scrape away leaves and twigs, you unearth a fragment of granite that could be the missing piece, or it might be part of a modern parking curb the line is blurred. Your shouts of "Eureka!" echo dumbly across the historic site, eliciting bewildered stares from passing tourists clutching maple syrup-scented candles. You fetch a metal detector that beeps at every hidden nail, soda can tab, and modern ring pull, forcing you to weed through century-old detritus for any sign of the Pilgrims' footprint. When you finally strike a signal over what appears to be a buried metal plate, you dig gingerly, wary of dislodging a time capsule that contains nothing but mid-20th century lawn ornaments. Beneath the surface, you find layers of asphalt, crushed seashells, and decades of sediment that suggest the rock's location has been an archaeological nightmare. You note how every storm seems to rewrite the shoreline, shifting sand and shaving away the evidence like a cosmic tide eraser. Researchers once used sonar to scan the bay floor, but the echo patterns looked more like sunken shopping carts and lost earbuds than ancient boulders. You pant as you lug your equipment across treacherous tidal flats, cursing the fact that no one bothered to affix a GPS beacon to that selfish hunk of granite. Your colleague speculates that the rock might be a composite of several stones glued together in the 18th century, a colonial hack job meant to satisfy curious visitors. You grimace at the thought of an early marketing stunt masquerading as historical fact, a stunt that predates infomercial claims by 2 centuries. A local historian hands you a faded map sketched by a pilgrim's grandson, complete with scrawled notes and coffee stains that smell faintly of regret. The coordinates on the map are so imprecise that you could drop a marble from a drone's height and still be closer to the rock than the marked spot. You line up the map to modern satellite imagery and watch as the spot you dig up lands you in someone's backyard flower bed. A disgruntled homeowner emerges, wielding a garden hoe and demanding to know why you're disturbing their begonias in the pursuit of colonial clickbait. You apologize profusely and offer them a free guest pass to your next historical live stream if only they'll let you continue the excavation. Back at the official site, you find a plaque that proudly proclaims, "Original Plymouth Rock Do Not Touch." Yet no one seems to know if it ever was. You run your fingers along the smooth surface and wonder if this was the very spot Bradford's boots pressed into granite or just another redirected tourist trap. The plaque is flanked by security cameras that record endless footage of people kissing the rock for good luck, a tradition that makes little archaeological sense. You imagine pilgrims with muddy shoes going through metal detectors, their treasures confiscated before touching the holy slab. To solve the mystery, you decide to drill a core sample with modern equipment, hoping to match the mineral content to nearby geological outcrops. The drill bit whines as it bites into stone, sending shivers down your spine with its sinister promise of unveiling the truth. When you extract the core, dust pockets and shell inclusions reveal the rock's true origin, a glacial erratic carried from Maine rather than a local formation. The discovery implies that the original landing rock was probably a random boulder the settlers deemed photogenic enough to step on. You chuckle at the absurdity. Imagine the pilgrims shrugging, planting their feet on whatever giant rock lay around while thinking they'd stumbled into history. Your data logger records temperature, humidity, and GPS coordinates. But you suspect the only stat worth noting is how many times you'll have to explain this on Q&A forums. You photograph the core sample like a proud parent at a kindergarten art show, eager to prove your point to doubters in academic journals and YouTube comment threads. Yet despite your high-tech findings, a nagging question persists. Which rock is the real one? And does it even matter when the legend holds more power than granite? You draft a press release that teases the world with new evidence. Plymouth Rock was a random boulder. Historians shocked, fully expecting clickbait revival. When you propose replacing the official rock with one calibrated for historical authenticity, proposals are met with outrage by souvenir vendors fearing loss of knee-high traffic. You realize that the myth of Plymouth Rock functions better as a pilgrimage site than as a factual artifact, and tourists prefer a good story over scientific accuracy. The irony stings like a mosquito bite. The only constant here is change, and the rock's meaning has shifted as much as the shoreline itself. At sunset, you pack your tools, core samples secured in foam-lined containers, and imagine the academic papers that will ensue. You snap a selfie with the official rock, pouting like a beauty influencer promoting a lipstick shade called colonial grey. The sky darkens, rain clouds rolling in to wash away footprints, and hopes that anyone will remember tomorrow exactly where that slippery slab once lay. You slip on your hood and vow that if your descendants ask, you'll point to the map location with a shrug and declare, "It was here, or there, or maybe over there." As you drive away, you pass a row of plastic guide signs reading "Historical Site," each one bent and sun-bleached, like forgotten road signs in an old video game. You muse that maybe the true mystery isn't the rock's location, but how easily people buy into historical convenience when it comes gift-wrapped narrative arcs. You smile at the absurdity that this humble boulder has outlasted centuries of colonization, commercialization, and constant repositioning. Packing up your muddy gear, you're struck by a deep respect for the Pilgrims' urge to mark time in stone, even if that stone keeps getting moved for maximum tourist yield. You crouch beside a shallow pit filled with charred corn cobs that look like fossilized corn dogs, left too long in a microwave oven. The kernels are blackened and pockmarked from ancient insect feasts, resembling microscopic bowling balls with half the holes chewed away. You scrape away ash to reveal hidden kernels and husk fragments, real-life breadcrumbs of Patuxet Thanksgiving platters gone awry. Pulling a single husk fiber, you note its fibrous weave was so tight, it might have doubled as a hair tie for a pilgrim with long locks. You mutter under your breath that modern grocery store corn has nothing on this Romano-electrocuted variety in terms of grit. A colleague gasps when you sniff a kernel, catching a whiff of smoke and earthy funk that could clear nasal congestion like a Vicks infusion. You catalogue each shard in a clear tube labelled 3.4A, Culinary Atrocity Evidence, ready to gross out future gastronomy students. Beyond the pit, you discover fragments of a clay smoking pipe, etched with geometric patterns, so intricate they rival a kaleidoscope on LSD. You pry the bowl free and marvel at its charred interior, evidence that someone used it to inhale sweet grass and tobacco in equal measure. The soot inside still clings stubbornly like your last bad date's name, a sticky reminder of early high society rituals. Your trowel unearths bone whistles shaped like tiny birds, likely used for hunting calls but possibly doubling as prehistoric party horns. You blow into one, producing a squeaky tweet that echoes across the wetlands, startling a flock of gulls into what looks like an airborne dance. You imagine Patuxet children playing bird-chirping pranks on passing elders, then banished to the woods for a week in colonial birch bark jails. Next, you find stone net weights carved into the shape of frog heads, heavy enough to anchor fishing nets and light enough to give tadpoles nightmares. Each weight bears finger grooves, worn smooth by countless casts into local streams, a tactile diary of subsistence fishing. You compare the grooves to your own palm lines, and joke that your future palm reader would be baffled by these aquatic life imprints. Your brush taps against a slim piece of deer antler carved with notches like tally marks, perhaps a lunar calendar marking planting seasons. You rub your thumb over each notch and mentally calculate that these markings could correspond to moon cycles rather than Monday deadlines. A sudden squall sends rain hammering your excavated trench, turning it into a muddy slip and slide that threatens to send you and your artifacts into the drink. With the trench filling faster than a bathtub with a stuck faucet, You scramble to cover sensitive items with foil and hope for the best. After the rain subsides, you examine a piece of bark soaked through but still etched with charcoal drawings of torsos and headdresses. The drawings depict figures in motion, possibly dancing or performing rituals, their arms extended like early TikTok influencers choreographing a dance challenge. The charcoal lines are so crisp that you suspect the artist had a steady hand and a serious artistic calligraphy degree from the swamp. You digitize the sketches with your phone, resisting the urge to add a filter that would brighten the charcoal lines for Instagram clout. Nearby, you find a cavity lined with clay where someone sank a small wooden bowl filled with animal fat and plant resin as a devotional offering. A strong scent of pine and musk still clings to the residue, an olfactory ghost of offerings meant for deities or the next rainstorm. You carefully chip at the clay lining and uncover a small cache of fish vertebrae arranged like a miniature Stonehenge. The arrangement suggests an offering to guarantee healthy catches, fish runs that were vital to a tribe's winter survival. Your scientific mind notes parallels to modern lottery rituals, throwing coins in fountains to wish for good fortune, but with fish instead of change. Each fish bone is pristine for its age, a testament to the preservative genius of peat and cool coastal microclimates. You package the bone cache in a padded box labeled 3.4. See Ritual Osteology, chuckling at the bureaucratic absurdity. On the pit's edge, you spot a fleck of red ochre pigment adhered to a rock fragment, the first color you've seen since step 1 of this swamp gauntlet. You rub the pigment between your fingers, staining skin like a toddler with finger paint ambition. A spark of inspiration hits. The Patuxet might have used ochre to decorate faces during healing ceremonies rather than your modern face masks at spas. You envision survivors draped in red dust, chanting through congestion and bruise-like spirituality. Nearby, you locate an obsidian flake so sharp it could shave hair off your forearm with minimal effort, a portable razor of the ancient world. You gingerly hold it by its dull end, grateful that your fingers remain intact while marveling at its surgical potential. This tool likely served a dual purpose in skinning deer and scoring ceremonial plant leaf sufficiency before battery power. The sunlight catches its sheen, reminding you how technology once relied on nature's gifts rather than lithium or solder. You tuck the flake into a foam-lined case, wary of slicing through your glove and spilling blood for an artifact that once harvested wildlife. Beyond the obsidian, you unearth a cluster of tiny shells arranged in a spiral, possibly a hair ornament or decorative inlay. The shells glimmer with a pearlescent glow that belies centuries of waterlogging and microbial recklessness. You delicately lift the spiral and imagine an ancient artisan weaving it into braided hair before standing proud at a seasonal feast. You flash a grin, picturing a Patuxet influencer sporting this spiral on social media only Instagram existed in 1620. With dark clouds returning, you bag up the artifacts and step back, feeling the weight of both discovery and responsibility pressing on your shoulders. You pack away your trowel, aware that each item you've unearthed rewrites a chapter of a culture that refuses to stay buried. You stand before a shallow trench where the last remnants of a Patuxet village boundary are hinted at by faint post holes in sticky clay. Your shovel edge scrapes the wet soil, revealing thin strips of woven grasses that once lined wigwam floors like eco-friendly yoga mats. You gently brush away silt to uncover a carved stone pendant shaped like a turtle, its shell pattern painstakingly engraved, though worn smooth by time. Each groove in the shell motif catches the dim sunlight filtering through overcast skies, sparkling faintly like a forgotten heirloom rediscovered at a thrift store. You cradle the pendant between thumb and forefinger, imagining it hanging close to someone's heart during a dawn fishing ritual. Your colleague suggests it might have been a protective charm against storms at sea, and you can almost hear the thunder overhead lecturing you on maritime respect. You slip the pendant into a padded bag, securing it like a treasure more precious than any pirate map. Nearby, a moss-covered musket ball lies half-buried, an anomaly that hints at post-contact tensions and first skirmishes between settlers and indigenous defenders. You prod it with the trowel and find it fused to a corroded iron fragment, like two archenemies locked in eternal combat. You muse that if this ball could talk, it'd spill centuries of gossip about bullet ricochets and ill-fated mashups of flintlock and bow. Next to the ball, a scattering of red ochre-painted pebbles dots the trench-like confetti from a victory ceremony long faded from memory. You scoop them into a tray labeled 3.5 B. Ceremonial markers, sworn to preserve their pigment stains for lab analysis. Your notes speculate that these pebbles mark the entrance to a sacred feast ground, or perhaps they were part of a rite of passage involving fish traps. You record their GPS coordinates with the zeal of someone tagging spoilers for a blockbuster movie. A sudden gust of wind rattles your hat, reminding you that even archaeology can be a hurricane of surprises. Your brush reveals a fragment of bark etched with spiraling glyphs, their loops reminiscent of modern graffiti tags left overnight on urban walls. You photograph the glyphs, aware that even in 1620 they were dropping street art before streetlights existed. Each swirl and dimple in the bark seems to narrate a story of harvest rituals, lunar cycles, or perhaps ancient stand-up comedy routines lost to the bog. You catalogue the piece under 3.5. C. Glyphical reservations, winking at your own pun like an archaeologist turned stand-up MC. Beyond the trench, you discover a cache of cedar bark scrolls, each rolled tight and preserved by acidic soil like nature's own scroll casing. You unroll one piece carefully, revealing faded drawings of deer tracks and waterfowl, perhaps a field guide or a hunting permit that never needed government approval. The illustrations are so precise you could map migratory patterns better than your digital wildlife apps. Holding the scroll to the light, you see a watermark pattern matching a nearby river delta, a natural origin stamp older than modern printing presses. You place the scroll on a sterile tray and photograph it from multiple angles, resisting your urge to Photoshop the birds so they look more majestic. A colleague examines the scroll's edges and notes tiny insect holes forming a rough circular pattern, likely a primitive barcode of soul retrieval rituals. You scratch your head imagining Patuxet tech support guaranteeing afterlife downloads via beetles. Beside the scrolls, a cluster of quartz flakes lies in a neat pile like a prehistoric electronics repair kit. Each flake is razor sharp, suggesting tool-making sessions conducted with surgical precision rather than brute force. You test the edge on a twig and slice it cleanly, marveling at the timelessness of simple tools doing complex work. Your mind spirals to imagine a Marie Kondo episode set in 1620, with artifacts tapped gently to spark joy instead of dust. You tally the flakes and sketch their cross-sections, pages filling faster than your phone's camera roll. Under the flakes, you expose charcoal smears on a flat stone possibly, the remnants of an impromptu art studio by a village elder. The smudges form abstract shapes, evoking birds in flight and swirling Winsan early essay in expressionism. Each smear feels like a rebellious flourish in an age before canvas, an homage to creativity's unstoppable urge. You swab a tiny fragment for carbon dating, knowing results will come back in weeks do, slow for instant gratification but just right for scholarly satisfaction. Standing back, you survey the mosaic of discoveries, from beads to bones to botanical records. A collage of lives once vividly lived. The irony hits you hard. These artifacts outlasted weapons of conquest and treaties that crumbled faster than your morning latte. You imagine the Patuxet voices murmuring through the soil, reminding you that history isn't owned by whoever wields the shovel. Gathering your tools, you take one last look at the trench, now brimming with stories rather than dirt. You pat the edge of the excavation with reverence, as if closing a book after the final page turn. You glimpse the horizon where Segment 4 will contrast these discoveries with the elite comforts of colonial life, setting the stage for fresh, gross-out comparisons. With a grin, you stash your gear and adjust your muddy jacket for the walk back to camp. You can almost hear the editing deadline looming, promising hours of transcribing, scripting, and adding cartoon sound effects. But for now, you savor this archaeological high, pumped by the thrill of unearthing tangible connections across centuries. And hey, if you're still digging this muddy mystery, smash that like button and subscribe, drop a comment on where in the muck you're tuning in from. You step over the threshold of the Sashim's longhouse and immediately choke on a haze of tobacco smoke so thick it could smother a candle. Flickering firelight dances off carved wooden masks that leer down from the rafters like ancient text messages from the underworld. Mats of woven reeds line the dirt floor in neat rows, each cushion a pillow stuffed with softly dried grass and embroidered hides that smell faintly of pine sap polish. Massasoit's family reclines on these cushioned thrones as though they were setting the trend at some cutthroat colonial design expo. They pass around buttery eel glistening like fishy silk, drizzling it with just enough maple glaze to make a modern chef weep with envy. You, meanwhile, are handed a wooden bowl of half-rotten corn mush, flecked with river grit and the occasional bead of slimy water. Your jaw clenches as you try to chew each scoop, but your teeth crack like ancient clay pots under pressure. They watch politely, lips lifted in faint smiles so practiced they could sell tickets on a stage. One of Massasoit's daughters offers you a string of fish oil, lustrous pearls, as if awarding you a participation medal for table manners. You glower back, a mouthful of mush, threatening to reverse course at any moment. Nearby, a servant delicately dusts your ragged boots with sweet pine resin, creating a scent clash that screams, "You don't belong here," in botanical bold letters. A hush falls as they discuss the latest trade rumors, comparing wampum rates with the same fervor a Wall Street broker would reserve for blue-chip stocks. You nod along, though you understand none of the melodic Algonquian syllables swirling around like a cryptic song. Your only contribution is a pathetic grunt that sounds suspiciously like, "I'm dying." They chuckle softly, then lean in to share whispers about upcoming harvest festivals and secret moonlight ceremonies you'll never be invited to. Their herbal salves, pounded from squashed berries and sunny moss, sit neatly arranged in carved wooden bowl-spotent alternatives to your scurvy-ridden limbs crying out for a bandage. You've been lathering your wounds in sawdust poultices that feel like trading one kind of grit for another. In contrast, they casually apply a thin layer of sweetgrass balm that would trick your nostrils into a spa day if only you were breathing. One elder produces a walnut shell cup filled with bright cranberries steeped in warm grease, offering you a sip that tastes like liquid rebellion against your Western palate. You brace yourself and take a hesitant gulp, only to find it oddly comforting in a feel my ancestors stirring kind of way. They raise their cups in a silent toast, eyes glinting with amused curiosity as they wait for your verdict. You manage a hesitant nod instead of a refined cheers, prompting another round of gentle mirth. Their conversation shifts to communal hunting grounds, negotiating permissions with diplomatic precision that leaves your mind reeling harder than any storm-tossed deck. You try to interject about maps and treaties, but your geography consists of directional guesses and a mad dash to avoid frostbite. Instead, they offer you a carved wooden mask to breathe through, instructing you to inhale the scent of cedar that clarifies the soul. You hold the mask at arm's length, imagining it might double as a medieval air freshener if you ever return home. Above you, the rafters creak as if sharing the same joke, sprinkling a few pine needles onto the dirt floor in silent applause. Your stomach grumbles in protest, which they interpret as an invitation for more maple-glazed eel, like feeding a baby who refuses cereal. They pass the dish again, but you shake your head so vigorously you nearly lose your grip on the mask. An aunt of Massasoits leans over to poke at your coarse breeches, murmuring something that might mean welcome or when did you last wash. You want to boast about modern laundry machines, but wisely bite your tongue before dredging up thoughts of alpaca wool and synthetic detergents. They erupt in gentle laughter at your compressed silence, fingers dancing over clean hides to keep pace with the rhythmic chuckles. One young cousin produces a pouch of finely ground pine charcoal and hands it to you as if it's a holy relic, a makeshift toothbrush that promises fresher breath than any dip in your chamber pot would deliver. You gratefully accept, though the charcoal's gritty kiss feels more like exfoliating your gums than cleaning them. Then the elder stands and claps softly, signaling the end of this intimate exchange and a graceful segue to the next ceremony you can't pronounce. You rise, knees creaking like an old oak door, aware that every eye in the longhouse tracked your every move. The hush deepens once more as incense smoke curls through the rafters, forming shapes that look suspiciously like dancing corn sprites. You swallow, trying not to sweat through your woolen tunic, which feels like a straitjacket tailored by a sadist. In contrast, the Sachem's family lounges with the ease of people who've never known frostbite or mouldy rations. They gesture for you to follow them deeper into the longhouse, where leather-bound storyboards await to lecture you on origin myths that make your bedtime fairy tales sound like dumpster fires. You shuffle forward, every step a reminder that you're an awkward suitcase in a room of finely curated antiques. One final elder leans back on a cushioned hide and grins, revealing teeth so straight and white they could blind a passing crow. They call you visitor in tones that are polite, but weighted with a hint of, let's see how long you last. You offer a half-hearted grin, which probably registers as insane man with no sense of smell in their lexicon. And just as you brace for the next ritual, you realize that even the walls are watching, carved masks breaking into silent applause at your misery. Enjoy the VIP treatment plus a side of existential dread. Inside the central chamber of the longhouse, you find yourself perched on a polished wooden dais that gleams like a stage at your most awkward high school play. A low-domed ceiling of interwoven reeds arches above you, trapping the scent of smoked fish and burning pine resin like some ancient air freshener. The walls are lined with woven tapestry panels depicting great hunts and harvest feasts, are visual flecks of the Sachem's family achievements that makes your freezer's beef 50% off magnet seem pathetic. At the far end, Massasoit's eldest son reclines on a throne carved from a single oak trunk, its bark peeled to reveal swirls of creamy wood beneath. You are ushered to a bench carved with serpent motifs, a seat meant for honored guests, and apparently guests who are about to look like deer caught in headlights. The bench creaks ominously as you lower yourself onto it, your knees threatening to buckle under the unexpected weight of all that polished craftsmanship. Around you, advisors in cedar leaf robes exchange glances, their teeth gleaming under lip paint made from crushed berries that probably wouldn't pass any modern FDA test. A servant arrives with a communal wooden mug brimming with pungent fish broth, its surface dotted with floating bones that would give any horror movie prop master a run for their money. You lift the mug like a chalice of doom and take a tiny sip, wincing as the rancid flavor slides down your throat like sandpaper. They observe you politely, nodding as though this is the most normal thing you could do for breakfast. Next arrives a platter of jerky sliced thin across a bear's haunches and smoked over alderwood until it snaps like a burnt credit card. You chew each strip with the enthusiasm of someone reliving their worst gym smoothie, filing away notes for a future rant to your hypothetical modern foodie followers. An elder in a headdress of eagle feathers raises his hand, halting all chatter in the room with the quiet authority of a stock market crash siren. Silence descends heavier than the wool tunic you've been forced to wear for days, and you realize your scariest challenge yet will be keeping your expression neutral. The elder's face is painted in stripes of white clay and red ochre, each pigment signifying a victory in battle or treaty negotiation too ancient for your brain to process without subtitles. He begins to recite the lineage of sachems before him, strings of names rolling off the tongue like an epic saga you weren't prepared to binge-watch. Their voices merge into a rhythmic chant, punctuated by the soft hammering of gifts being placed before the council. Bundles of wampum, carved bone beads, and a single, pristine clamshell that gleams like a Hollywood set prop. You shift your weight, trying to appear deeply moved by their ancestral pride instead of the luxury of never again needing to gnaw on lichen stew. Someone murmurs something in Algonquian, and the elder's son translates with a gentle smile. They wish to include you in their next seasonal rite, a test of endurance that sounds suspiciously like forced cardio. You manage a nod that you hope reads as eager volunteer rather than terrified tourist. A cousin of the sachem's flicks a braided leather pouch across the bench to you. Inside lies roasted acorns perfectly shelled and dusted in a spice blend that tastes like autumn incarnate. You pop an acorn in your mouth and are surprised to find it crunchy, nutty, and oddly comforting until you spot a piece of bark mixed in and nearly swallow it whole. Laughter ripples softly through the advisors, a warm gesture that almost makes you forget you're an underdressed interloper in their ancestral domain. The council discussion shifts to boundary markers and hunting rights as if comparing property deeds at a colonial town hall meeting. They mention recent visits from English traders, trading cloth for corn and promising miracle medicine that probably won't cure more than a hangnail. You recall Dr. Harris back home hawking tonics of questionable origin and find it poetic that both worlds sell snake oil in different bottles. A tapestry unrolled beside the elder reveals a birch bark map etched with hunting grounds, river bends, and sacred groves, every crease telling a story you lack the context to fully appreciate. You analyze the map as if it were a high-stakes board game, rotating it in your hands and wishing you had a compass or at least a smartphone GPS to make sense of the scribbles. Advisors debate the relocation of a fishing spot near the estuary, weighing ecological balance against the lure of abundant yields. You try to contribute by pointing to a curved line that you assume is a river, only to have the elder gently guide your finger toward a symbol that means bear path. Embarrassment floods you hotter than any scalding stew you've endured. and you pray the wood floor will swallow you whole before you utter another colonial faux pas. One wise elder offers to teach you their seasonal calendar, carved into a wooden staff that doubles as a timepiece and weather app no subscription required. You bow your head in grateful acceptance, silently promising to memorize roots and rituals rather than default to the Gregorian calendar you were weaned on. In contrast to the cramped, damp quarters you've been sleeping in, this chamber's warmth radiates from a central hearth that crackles with logs imported from the sacred cedar grove. You inhale the aromatic smoke and momentarily imagine your bunk at home, complete with memory foam mattress and heating pads, and feel gratitude swirl with guilt in equal measure. The elder's daughter brings forth a small pot of herbal ointment, its bright green hue promising relief from your gorge-induced stomach cramps and knee jolts. She applies it to the back of your hand with gentle precision, her fingers moving like a masseuse at a luxury spa that neither charges a dime nor requires a tip. You wince as the cooling touch settles in, marveling at the contrast between this instant relief and your reliance on over-the-counter pills that probably contain more chemicals than good. The council rises as one, their robes swishing like Pendleton blankets in a breeze, and you scramble to your feet before falling face first into the muddy floor. They lead you toward a side chamber, where dancers await to perform a midnight ceremony, the air already thrumming with the promise of drums and chants. You follow, every step a reminder that you're the guest of honor and an easily amused spectator rolled into one. As the last advisor closes the main chamber door behind you, the scent of conifer and ceremony lingers, reminding you that you're no longer in a world of asphalt and alarm clocks. You straighten your back, awkwardly patting your tunic for lint, hoping they won't notice your constant fidgeting. The dancers' footsteps echo down the corridor, and you realize the next part of this social deep dive will demand more than just a sturdy stomach. It will require dance moves that don't resemble a seizure. You take a deep breath and step forward, bracing yourself for whatever absurdity awaits in the twilight hall of elite rituals. You step into the side chamber, and your nostrils are bombarded by the earthy aroma of fresh pine needles strewn across the earthen floor. A circle of dancers clad in soft deerskin leggings and breeches stands before a shallow pit where embers glow a dull red like the eyes of a disgruntled dragon. Torches affixed to carved wooden posts bathe the room in flickering amber, throwing the dancers' elongated shadows across walls etched with hunting scenes. One dancer's headdress sprouts talons of eagle feathers that quiver when she raises her arms, as if prepping for an aerodynamic test flight. The elder who guided you here motions for you to stand at the edge of the circle, offering you a simple cedar bark flute. Your mouth clutches the makeshift instrument like a dry hominy kernel, and you blow a tentative note that sounds like a seagull calling for its lunch. The flute's tone cracks through the hush, sending dancers into motion as if you just pressed the start button on an ancient iPod. Drums join the cacophony, carved from hollowed tree trunks and thumped with deerskin mallets in a rhythm that pulses through your bones like an overdue gym membership reminder. The dancers' feet kick up dust rings that swirl around your ankles, coating your boots in a layer of fuzzy sediment that makes you resemble a walking moss ball. Their movements are fluid yet precise, a choreographed flex of muscle memory honed over generations instead of downloaded from YouTube tutorials. You try to mimic one of the basic steps: a crouch, a pivot, a swift hop, end up looking like a malfunctioning scarecrow with stage fright. A dancer shoots you a sympathetic grin, her lips painted in streaks of red ochre that seem to glow under the torchlight. She offers to guide your foot into position, but as she steps close, you detect a whiff of fermented berry wine and pine resin in her hair. You flinch, imagining how long it would take to get that scent out of any modern shampoo ad. Meanwhile, the drum beat quickens, and the dancers shift into a faster cadence that makes your dozen-hour ship crossing feel like a leisurely cruise in comparison. You swallow hard as sweat beads on your brow, picturing your Airbnb back home with temperature-controlled AC and soundproof walls. Their chant begins in deep, rumbling tones that resonate like a well-tuned subwoofer at a rock concert you definitely wouldn't be caught near. You try to hum along but realize your lungs are better suited to belching than chanting, so you mumble through the flute instead. The music swells, and the dancers form a tight circle, stomping in unison until the floor vibrates enough to dislodge the odd pebble from the earth. You look down to find a stray stone bouncing under your boots, and your heart skips a beat like you just checked your Venmo balance after a shopping spree. Suddenly, a slender youth steps forward, holding a bowl of turtle broth so opaque you can't tell if it's soup or swamp water. He offers it to you with a solemn nod, and you know refusing would be about as polite as spitting in a monarch's face. You sip the broth, grimacing as fishy undertones and chunks of algae collide in your mouth like unwanted party guests. A hush falls as the dancers pause, waiting for your critique, so you muster the best compliment you can. Refreshing, which only earns you polite confusion. The elder's daughter giggles and steps behind the youth to pour a handful of crushed wild mint into the remaining broth, recasting it as a palate cleanser. You stir the liquid around with a carved bone spoon, feeling oddly like a participant on some high-stakes cooking reality show. As you swallow the minty mixture, the dancers resume, this time weaving in animal motifs, imitating foxes slinking through underbrush and owls gliding through night skies. Their costumes rustle with hidden bells and feathers, each movement punctuated by tiny jingles that sound like wind chimes possessed by mischievous sprites. You watch, entranced, as one masked figure mimics a grizzly bear's feigned charge, claws extended and breath labored in a perfectly theatrical roar. Your foot twitches, wanting to join, but your brain reminds you you're an accidental tourist here, not a headliner in the wilderness's greatest show. A dark-skinned elder who resembled a living tree trunk gnarled features, and bark-toned skin rises to chant a blessing for the hunters soon to depart. His voice echoes off the reed ceiling, stretching the words into an eerie lullaby that feels like it could calm even the crankiest toddler to sleep. The dancers kneel in unison, their heads bowed until their masks nearly scrape the ground, then spring up in a burst of synchronized energy. A spotlight flickers overhead, actually just the angle of a torch illuminating the dew on their skin that glistens like they'd just stepped out of an artisanal rain shower. You remark to yourself that this would make a killer viral TikTok if you could only conjure Wi-Fi in a 17th century longhouse. The ceremony crescendos with a final drum solo so thunderous it feels like the earth itself is pounding its fists in applause. The dancers converge on a central totem, laying woven vines and painted stones at its base as an offering to spirits you can't pronounce. You inch closer, wide-eyed, scanning the totem's carving spirals, animal tracks, and symbols that look like a QR code encoded in bark. A cousin of the Sunken drapes a garland of fresh cedar boughs around your neck, and you suddenly feel part of this world's rhythm. Your chest tightens with gratitude and awe, mingled with the primal urge to phone your mom and tell her you're still alive. The elder lays a hand on your shoulder, saying something solemn in their tongue before translating, "You survived this night, and you share our story with worlds beyond these woods." You swallow hard, realizing that this tale will outlive any YouTube algorithm trend, saved in memory instead of a hard drive. They clap once, and the dancers disperse like mist at dawn, leaving you alone with the glowing embers and the faint scent of pine. you step back into the torchlit corridor, muscles humming from the dance and mind buzzing with 1,000 new images that you'd better memorize before hitting record. You shuffle deeper into the cedar-framed hall, where lavish tapestries hang like social media highlights of a dynasty that ages better than any TikTok star. Above you, the rafters glisten with pollen and smoke, creating a natural diffuser that would cost a fortune at your favorite spa. A low table carved from a single hickory slab stretches before you, underhandedly challenging your grocery budget ambitions. Atop it sits a spread of smoked bear shoulder, so tender it practically melts into your mouth without chewing, exposing every microscopic fissure of your dental work. Beside it lies a mound of wild rice, tossed with crushed juniper berries that pop like miniature flavor fireworks on your tongue. A gleaming clay pot holds pudding made from boiled cattail pollen, its consistency reminiscent of budget chicken pot pie filling but without the crisp crust. You reach for a leather bowl of seasonal berries that glimmer in the torchlight like nature's own neon sign. You tuck in a handful and note the sweet tart explosion momentarily makes you question every kale smoothie you've ever forced down. Next, you're offered a slim reed tube containing ground deer marrow, an appetizer so primal it practically demands you grunt approval. You oblige, grimacing as the rich fat coats your mouth in a way that feels like a Vaseline massage gone rogue. Meanwhile, the sachem's inner circle lounges on cushioned hides, legs crossed like million-dollar yoga instructors in a retreat. They nibble and sip from birch bark cups of elderflower infusion that smell like wedding bouquets and cure everything from hiccups to existential dread. You flick a drop of marrow onto the highly polished floor, predicting it will become tomorrow's cautionary tale in the next council meeting. Your tunic stinks of yesterday's stew, yet there's smells of cedar and fresh mint, as though they bathe hourly in aromatic elixirs. A favored advisor leans over to whisper about upcoming treaty discussions, her breath carrying the faintest note of wild mint chocolate. You blink, wondering if those flavor combinations even technically exist outside this magical realm. They debate the merits of trading furs for English cloth bolts and whether the gaudy dyes will impress tribal leaders more than genuine beaver pelts. You try to interject with a casual, cheaper on Alibaba, but your lack of Wi-Fi awareness earns only sympathetic pats on the back. A servant arrives with a horn filled with honey that's so clear it looks like pure sunlight distilled into liquid. You drizzle it over freshly cracked chestnuts and nod as though this is precisely how your morning oatmeal should taste. Your stomach rumbles in jealous protest at the memory of your own microwaved popcorn dinners. They offer you a quill and parchment scroll to record your favorite dishes, implicitly inviting you to become their resident food critic. You consider sketching a latte and croissant just to throw them off, then wisely resist the urge to confuse historical record-keeping. At one end, a pair of musicians strike up a tuneless melody on bone whistles, filling the space with notes that twitch your eyebrows like a bad ringtone. You tap your foot to the beat, feeling the cedar floor vibrate through your boots like a poorly synchronized subwoofer. The elder chief stands and commands the music to shift into a lament for lost ancestors, the mood centering on reverence rather than revelry. You feel a chill run down your spine, not least because this longhouse lacks modern insulation or any notion of central heating. Candle fat drips from carved sconces above, pooling like molten cheese that you desperately want to scrape and taste. Instead, you settle for inhaling the smoky aroma, which your brain advertises as artisan candle experience. They pass around woven baskets of dried apples layered with wild nutmeg and smoked salt flakes that tingle like tiny static shocks on your taste buds. You pop one into your mouth, and marvel at how far you've come from grocery store Cheetos and microwave dinners. The chief's daughter pulls you aside to teach the proper way to hold a woven fan crafted from turkey feathers and buffalo hide. You wave it experimentally, imagining it would be a viral gadget in any beachfront Instagram influencer's toolkit. They show off how the fan's precise angle sends swirling patterns of scent from cedar incense across the hall. You try to replicate the gesture, ending up resembling someone desperately signaling for a taxi. Laughter ripples through the circle, but it's warm and inclusive, not the mocking tone you'd fear among strangers. They hand you a mask carved from driftwood, its hollow eyes crafted to channel the wind's whispers into prophetic murmurs. You lift it onto your face and instantly feel like a woodland superhero auditioning for a Marvel cameo. The ceremony shifts to a silent meal where each bite is consumed in unison, creating a rhythmic chorus of chewing that feels like a primal metronome. You clench your jaw deliberately to match the beat, aware this might be your only chance to bond over synchronized dining. As the final ember fades in the hearth, they extinguish torches with gentle puffs of elderwood smoke. You watch the darkness engulf the room, approximating the blackout mode on your phone, only more ominous. One last advisor offers you a token made from carved bone that grants you honorary insider status, which you suspect will get you nowhere in your spam folder. You bow your head, tucking the token into your belt pouch, aware it might be the coolest souvenir you'll ever own. Then you rise, smearing a bit of berry stain on your cheek and thinking, I have dirtier anniversaries on my Instagram, but nothing feels this epic. You emerge back into the central longhouse chamber, blinking at the soft glow of embers still smouldering in the hearth. The once bustling room has settled into a calm hush, broken only by the crackle of pine logs and the low murmur of elders comparing notes on foreign visitors. You notice that every piece of furniture here is carved with symbols denoting rank, a difference you never saw in your own cramped pilgrim quarters. The Sacum's inner circle lounges on raised platforms that keep them above the smoke and dust that coat the floor. A servant kneels next to Massasoit, offering him fresh water in a finely crafted wooden cup while you still sip pond-sauce dregs from your chipped pewter flask. Every gesture around you exudes privileged simple tasks, are performed for the elite before they even realize they need them. In stark contrast, you recall your own damp tent walls where rats scuttled freely and you spent nights clawing at moldy blankets. Here, skin was never chilled by drafts, and hunger was always satisfied with wild game rather than putrid lichen stew. You overhear an advisor detailing the family's seasonal harvest festival plans, including precise schedules for ceremonial dances and gift exchanges. Meanwhile, your pilgrim hosts would celebrate with a meager communal meal that doubled as a medical experiment in scurvy prevention. You examine the walls around you and see hanging bundles of dried herbs that serve both as decoration and natural medicine dispensary. You've bandaged your frostbitten toes with ragged strips of cloth and clumps of sawdust, while these people used salves infused with plantain and golden seal. You move toward a corner where a young scribe writes on birch bark scrolls, transcribing laws that guide every aspect of their society. Your own compacts were drawn up hastily in freezing conditions by men who had never governed a colony before. The scribes here work in pairs, their scripts precise enough to rival any modern calligraphy class. You imagine trying to write by lamplight in the cramped cabin of the Mayflower, your quill tips splattering ink in haste. Audio echoes in this hall like a cathedral, not the hollow squeaks of rats in the ship's hold. You clasp your hands behind your back, trying to steady your nerves against the weight of centuries of tradition. The elder near you suddenly laughs, pointing to your threadbare breeches as though they were the height of frontier fashion. You force a smile, knowing your outfit lacks the cedar smoke scent and deerskin finesse of their attire. Conversations shift to diplomatic affairs, with mentions of neighboring tribes and potential alliances. They compare these negotiations to weaving a basket, where every strand must align perfectly. Your own alliances were built on shaky promises to investors who cared more about profit than survival. A flute melody drifts in from outside, reminding you that music here is woven into daily life, not booked behind church doors each Sunday. You imagine your weekly sermons, structured yet stiff, lacking the spontaneous spirit of these forest anthems. You step toward a carved totem pillar, tracing its grooves with your palm and feeling the cool wood beneath your fingertips. The tales etched into the pillar outshine any history books you studied back home. They record ancient victories and losses with the same reverence you reserve for Thanksgiving turkey. You wrap your fingers around a carved bone token still in your pouch, a keepsake and a symbol that you have been seen. It feels heavier than any coin your pilgrim host would accept for passage. You clear your throat, wanting to ask about their kinship structures but wary of interrupting this measured discourse. In their world, women held powerful roles as healers and negotiators, while in yours they were often confined to cooking and laundry. You recall the harsh rules of your own patriarchal society, where women's voices were often drowned by sermon bells. Here, council seats were shared, and decisions made by consensus over tobacco pipes and maple syrup-sweetened speeches. You find yourself longing for that sense of community rather than the isolation of your frost-bitten cottage. A curious advisor offers you a small loaf of nut bread sweetened with birch syrup, a final taste of this world's abundance. You accept it as though you might never taste such richness again outside these woods. In a final gesture, the Sunken's son places a feather from an eagle's wing behind your ear. The weight is symbolic of your inclusion, but paradoxically reminds you of the heaviness of cultural gaps you still carry. You stand in silence as the longhouse door opens to the chill night air, and you realize you've witnessed a society centuries ahead in social integration. You step out onto the mossy ground, the scent of cedar and ceremony hanging in the breeze like an invitation to reflect. The contrast between their world and your pilgrim reality couldn't be starker, and you feel both humbled and questionably homesick. Your journey has shown you that hierarchy isn't inherently cruel if it uplifts the community rather than subjugating it. You glance back at the glowing interior one last time, tempted to return but knowing your landing party awaits outside. You reach into your pouch, finger brushing against that carved token, and silently vow to tell their story with the reverence it deserves. If you're still with me, smash that like button and let me know in the comments where you'd survive longer. Well, look at you trading your moldy lichen for maple glazed eel, and not dying of embarrassment, too badly, in the process. You've glimpsed a world where community and ceremony outweigh scurvy and soggy socks, and your Instagram feed will never recover. Celebrate that surviving frostbite with a drum solo in your bones beats the hollows of any pilgrim church service. Now you can forever drop the line, "I survived a cedar-scented longhouse." At party sand, watch faces warp into envy. So next time you're tempted to complain about slow Wi-Fi or overpriced brunch, just remember this was only day one for these people. History's harshest invites definitely make modern complaints sound like first world whining.